Welcome to Leaders and Legends, the podcast focused on leadership and clinical trial execution. I'm your host, Patty Lushton, CEO of Diligent Pharma. In each episode, we'll get to know the individuals who are driving change and influencing the direction of our industry. Whether you're a seasoned executive yourself, an emerging leader, or simply passionate about clinical trials like I am, join us as we discuss our industry's most pressing challenges, the future of clinical trials, and hear insights and advice from the leaders who are moving our industry forward. Bari, thank you so much for being on the Leaders and Legends podcast.
Thanks, Patty. I actually have watched a few of them, and I'm honored to be in the group of leaders and legends that you're, having great conversations with.
Oh, well, thank you. It's so funny. I kind of just think people listen to them, but yeah, that's pretty cool that you watch them.
Well,
And
yeah.
Bari, when I was walking to work today, I was trying to remember when we met, and I think it was early days when you were at Icon and BMS was a client of mine. Does that compute for you? Like, were you an account executive or something at Icon?
I was. So actually, interestingly, because I was taking it back to Pfizer, but Icon was actually before that. And yes,
Yeah.
we had a strategic partnership with Icon with BMS when I was at Icon. And ultimately, I had all of the BMS work under me. So I almost felt like I worked for BMS and not Icon at the time. But yes, that's actually where we did interface first.
Yeah, so that was years ago. And I wonder if we could kind of start in the beginning. You've had a very interesting career trajectory. And I was wondering if could we kind of talk about the choices that you've made over the years with your career and what informed some of those decisions.
Sure. So I'll go all the way back. When I was thinking about what I wanted to do with my life and what kind of career I wanted, I thought I wanted to go to medical school. And I had been in graduate school at the time, and I didn't have any money to pay for graduate school. So I had to start working at the same time. And that is actually how I got into clinical research. And I realized as I was going to look at going to medical school that I was working and doing clinical trials and really getting involved in the science, and thought, this actually could be a career, not something that I do on the side just to make some money while I'm in graduate school. And so that was really the start, right? I started working at a CRO. Actually, it was Corning Besselar. Actually, it was even Besselar. So one of the first I know.
Really? Ah.
That
So I that's where I worked too. That was one of my first jobs at Besselar back in the day. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so
That's
Besselar was
interesting.
the first place that I worked. I lived near Princeton, and so it was in the Princeton area, so it was convenient. And ultimately, that changed to Corning Besselar, and then I moved into a gene therapy company, and that really kicked off my career in kind of the biotech world. And so, I didn't make real, I guess, informed decisions at the time, other than, did it seem interesting to me? Was it related to science? Is it, going down the path of, really driving something that I was interested in, and working with people? And so all of those combined, were partly what drove my early career choices. And ultimately, once I, left the CRO world only after a year, because I was offered this opportunity in what then, interestingly enough, gene therapy, this was 1993. And so
Wow.
gene therapy, we're still trying to do gene therapy today. The first treatments are, becoming possible, I'll say, in terms of, long-term success. But back 30 years ago, it seemed like it was cutting edge medicine, and it really was at the time. But it does show you how hard this, endeavor is, how difficult it is to bring new medicines and new modalities and new therapies to people, because that's 30 years later, right? That we're actually really seeing some things come to fruition. But just back to, my career, I had worked at a biotech company. It was very hands-on. It was a lot of, really figuring out how to do something very new in a space that, was really unexplored at the time. And it was dealing with patients and dealing with the FDA and dealing with writing studies. And so that really started my career. And I moved on to actually make more informed choices after that. After working at a few startup biotechs, really getting my hands involved in everything, having very broad experience, I was able to take some of that with me to then decide, well, where do I want to hone that experience? What do I want to be doing? And I found that my project management skills were the kind of the thing that I mastered. I was able to manage
Mm-hmm.
projects well, understand clinical trials, and then take that to really the next level of kind of business and operations and management. And so that's when in the early 2000s, I went from the biotech world for the most part to a large CRO, to Icon that you mentioned before, and really wanted to get broad global experience. I wanted to really understand the operating model behind how you drive clinical trials, which I thought a CRO was able to, provide some of a training ground and a learning experience for me. And then ultimately, I think, the goal for me after that was getting other experience in large pharma. And so I went to Pfizer and really started to understand the pharma side of the industry more so than really just understanding what, you might do in a small biotech company. And that's really what drove me ultimately to come to Regeneron 10 years ago was, of all the different parts of the industry that I was able to work on, what did I find the most both challenging but rewarding? And it really was the
Mm-hmm.
biotech space. And so I landed pretty much where I started back in what was then a smaller biotech. We're still a biotech. We're not a small one anymore, but ultimately, I've spent the last 10 years really building out, an organization in development operations to really drive, clinical trials and many modalities and all therapeutics, really focused on, how do you make a difference in people's lives? So that was my career, started out in a very different direction, not very different, but different to what I
Yeah.
initially anticipated. And really, once I had an opportunity that looked really interesting to capture my interest in science and helping people, I was able to then drive towards this, direction to, find a meaningful way to contribute.
Yeah, and I'm really struck by the sort of the depth and breadth of all the different roles that you've had, and it sounds like a kind of a consistent thread in what you described is that you're really making decisions about what kind of excites you from a scientific and intellectual standpoint. Making a difference. And so, with each of those career moves, was that sort of like oh, okay, I've mastered this. Now it's time to sort of take on my next new challenge. Like, what was the spark that kind of made you move to these sort of different roles? I guess looking back, they all kind of make sense, but
Yeah,
at
I
the
wish I
time,
wish
you
I
were
was
sort of
could say I was that clever. I don't know that I was. Right? I don't think there was this, master plan anywhere in
mm,
in my in my thinking. It really was, very distinct at the time. What was I working on? What interested me? And sometimes it's really about opportunity, right? You look around,
right.
you talked about BMS. My work at Icon and intersecting with kind of really focused on BMS as a company, embedded me in a company that then potentially led me to the next thing, which was, okay, this is how you do things at large pharma. Maybe I need to go to that side of the fence and really understand from the inside view, right? And so I think it was really a combination of all of that. I can't say I was, as I said, that clever, but I did look at, what did I think was important and how do I get a broad view? And when I talk to people, across my organization, outside of my organization, and they, have questions about how did you manage to, move into different roles and establish skills and all the things that you oversee, it's based on some of this, right? It's about having a broad horizon, about seeing, how all the different pieces get done. I will never claim to
Yeah.
be a master of many of them, but I believe I know enough to, oversee, to manage, to lead in a lot of spaces that
Hmm.
I don't have mastery of.
Yeah, and I think that the benefit of being in the industry for a while is that you sort of get to see sort of the trajectory, to sort of, from an external environment. You mentioned gene therapy and how that's evolved. And, you have this broad perspective that you could bring to bear. Um, I'm wondering if your early biotech days actually helped you develop some of those muscles of just being able to be quick on your feet and scrappy and thinking about things from a more holistic view, not being so siloed. Because I think what I'm seeing today is a lot of silos, a lot of sort of like people grow up in their careers of
Mhm.
whether it's a data manager or in the monitoring and project management track. And sometimes what's missing is that broader view and that holistic view. So I wonder if you could comment on that
Yeah.
and whether those early biotech days actually helped you.
Oh, I think it was transformational. I don't think I would be where I am today without that. And why I ultimately started in
Interesting.
biotech and went back to biotech. I do think, and
Wow.
being in a small company, it could be biotech, but a startup company, and really early, lack of structure, right? That exists in organizations, you have to learn things that you don't, you either don't have a skill set in or don't really understand that well. You have to have a
Hmm.
decent understanding. You have to learn how to find people who actually have expertise in that area. You have to have your hands in a lot of different spaces and really have a good understanding of them to see how it all fits together. And so you're right, building that muscle of connectivity. How do you figure out what aspects of an organization need to be even built or, exist? And then, yeah, some of it you do have to have the deep knowledge of. And I wouldn't say that, you having that broad view is always the thing you need, but it certainly is is required to get to a leadership level where you really understand, at least what others need to deliver on and how they can do it best. So yeah,
Yeah.
I absolutely would say that had a major influence in what I did later on, my ability to, again, as I said, not be that clever, but really understand, wow, how can I connect the dots here? What are
Hmm.
things that, what are the gaps that I need to build upon to do the next thing?
Yeah, and I think that that kind of that environment is really exciting too, sort of that startup environment. And um, you kind of get that gets into your bones in a way where you want that experience over and over. And I know, for me, I love that, and I actually try to bring that sort of culture and scrappiness in a way
Mhm.
to, my company now. And I want to talk to you a little bit about how, if that's informed the way you think about culture and inspiring teams and motivating people to sort of think differently or work differently.
Absolutely. I mean, look, I think culture is what drives a company. And so trying to maintain the culture or build upon a culture, I probably spend a good amount of my time doing that and trying to ensure that, we're driving in the right direction. Where, I would say at Regeneron, at least today, and even 10 years ago, as we get bigger, we're trying to maintain at least the elements of culture that made us who we were. And I've seen that at other
It's
companies too,
interesting.
right? It is some of the scrappiness. It's the hands-on component. And what's made it, I think, easier is the fact that, I work at a company that's still founder-led. So, the Regeneron's been around 37 years and the founders are still there, still leading it. They're physicians.
Amazing.
Scientists. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's amazing, right? But it actually helped to build the culture and maintain it because you still have the people who had the vision in the earliest days who stayed with that vision and who ultimately, are still there and very hands-on in the company. And that's what drives the culture at the organization I'm with today. But even working at other organizations, I mean, culture, it certainly comes from the top down, but it's everywhere. It's every person. And I think, spending time on it is essential. But yes, it's, I think you lead by example. So I'd say, I am I'm hands-on. I don't sit and lead. I work with my team, and we all work together to get things done. And I bring my skill sets, everyone brings theirs, and we work as a team. And every idea is a good one, right? It may not be the thing that we end up doing, but all ideas are encouraged. This is not just my idea of culture. This is the organization's idea, right? We bring people together because we believe that decisions are best made when you have a lot of different minds thinking about things and bringing their expertise to the table. So that's the culture that exists at Regeneron today. But it aligns with how I've operated, even at other places. I've always felt that. I've always felt like, having a team, having people around me who have different skill sets just makes me a better leader.
Yeah. And, having the original founders and the passion that they had when they started the business, the fact that they're still in the business, I'm sure is inspiring,
It is.
for
It is.
you, the other leaders,
Absolutely.
for the team. I think that's really cool. Um, well, I do want to talk about, we talked about how sort of the industry has evolved. You've had this interesting perspective of working at some of the largest companies in the world on both the pharma side as well as the CRO side. And I wonder if you could talk a bit about how you've seen sponsor and CRO relationships change or evolve over time. Do you think that there has been some vast improvement? Has things pretty much stayed the same? Are things starting to decline? Like, what's your
Yeah.
perspective on it?
I think it's rather cyclical, right? Like anything.
Hmm.
The models change, but you either have an in-house model, a full service model, a hybrid model, an FSP model, and it ebbs and flows, right? I've been at companies that started in one model, went to the next. I think it's somewhat dictated by the companies themselves, what stage of, their growth and, the organizational, effectiveness they're at, that dictate how the CRO relationships might, both not, help them, but also support the work that they need. So I think it's really dependent on the companies, the sponsors themselves, and how they're built and their stage of growth. At an early biotech, you work very differently with CROs than when you're in large pharma. But they might look the same, really dependent on the leaders, some of their view and vision. I think over time the relationships have been pretty solid. I don't think
Mm.
that there hasn't been an acknowledgement that the industry needs CROs, at least to date, to help take on the uncertainty, right? With molecules that what there's the statistic is, you know not very many approvals. Drugs take 10 years to get to the market. Of the hundreds of things, one of the molecules actually gets to approval. So
Hmm.
there's a lot of work that gets done, and there's a lot of uncertainty with how much effort, companies can put in. And so you need an organization like a CRO to help manage that uncertainty in the development life cycle. And so I think that the need for that has always been there. I think it is changing though, over the years
Hmm.
from, what was a very team focused environment to then, more commoditized, where you have lots of different functions that support. And I think it'll change again, right? So I think the change that we're looking at now is really the more technological change, right? How can AI, how can, that automation and some of the things that CROs, the services they provide, how will that change the dynamics between sponsors and CROs? Because it'll really mean, different work and different types of work and different roles that exist at both companies, that I think, won't happen today, but it's in the process of happening.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I didn't realize you were at Bestlar. I was there in the late 80s, early 90s. So I also have had this experience of big pharma and CROs. And I think there has been a maturity over the years in terms of the way the relationships are viewed. And I think it's partly because there's been so much migration from, leaders from pharma going into big executive roles at CROs
Yes.
and vice versa. But I do remember it was probably mid 2000s at Avoca, we did these bidirectional surveys, and it was sort of an idea that I had to start asking the pharma companies to get feedback from their CROs, because the work we had been doing for about a decade was to, on behalf of CROs, to ask their clients what they think of them, quantitative and qualitative data. And that was kind of hard to get off the ground. I mean, I remember meeting with an executive who I kind of posed this idea because we were gathering, all of this interesting data for them in other ways as part of a consulting project. And I said, well, what do you think about getting some feedback from your CRO partners? And he said, why would I do that? I mean, we're paying them. I remember he said, we're paying them to do what we need them to do. So why should I care what they think about us? And I was like, is this where we are as an industry? But, I think in some ways those were isolated cases, but things have changed and evolved. And I'm sure that your experiences, just in the way that you and your teams kind of relate to your CRO colleagues, must have been informed by the fact that you were in that position yourself.
Yeah, that's
Right?
right. Absolutely. It's funny you say that. I do remember, I was always a big proponent of the surveys that you were doing and that Avoca was doing. I thought that was a great, light bulb, effort that we should be
Thank
getting
you.
feedback. We should know what, how we're working with, again, I'll use the word partners, right? With our partners there, we have a very small, lean organization, even though we have a large pipeline. I'll say 1,200 people, but we use 4,000 people who sit at other organizations, and probably the number's larger than that when you think of all the vendors. I couldn't get the work done without those, 4,000 people outside my organization. And I do recall, being at a CRO, not being happy with the attitude that you just mentioned, right? They're the people I just
Yeah.
pay to get the work done. The reality is, and this is what I brought to Regeneron, and what I tried to do even at Pfizer after leaving a large CRO, was how do you get the CRO to be a part of your team, right? This is my extended team. This isn't a group that I just paid to do some work in the background. And I still have to try to continue to infuse that thinking today. It's not automatic. People come from a lot of different places, and they have some of the intent to be partners, but they are not necessarily good partners. So they, utilize the CRO in a way that they are just someone they hand off work to. And that's really not
Right.
the way we work. We try to ensure that the CRO is a part of our team. We meet with the CRAs. They're the representatives for us. That's the model we have. And ultimately, they have to feel like they're a part of the team. And so I know that's not the case everywhere. I know from being at a CRO, I know from being in, different companies, I know with the people coming into my organization who come from other places, it's not always, but often enough, the case that it's a, service provider relationship versus a partnership relationship. And that's really the way we've tried to work. Can't say that it happens all the time, every time, but ultimately that's the goal.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that part of the dynamic is that there's so much pressure in clinical trial execution, right? So things inevitably don't go exactly as planned. And it's hard. So there's sometimes a tendency, just human nature, to point fingers, to blame the provider. And yeah, it takes work, right? I mean, it's like any kind of relationship. There has to be a foundation of trust. And yeah, when the going gets tough, it is hard to just work in unison to try to figure it out. It's easier to just say, well, you know what, we've paid them, we've laid it out for them, and they're messing it up. So it's always been a very interesting dynamic for me. And part of the reason that I started my previous company was just to try to address, some of those gaps. And as you said, things will continue to change and evolve, especially with tech. And I just wonder, how do you sort of view sort of the evolution of trial execution through the lens of talent and maybe some of the talent gaps that we might have right now as we look to the future, given how things are changing so quickly with technology? Yeah, how
Yeah,
do you think about that?
there's a number of different facets to that I think I'm considering today, because ultimately there's a few things going on. One, I think, we don't have enough, even, I go back to, I went to high school interested in science, went to college, thought, okay, I'm going to go be a doctor because I was interested in science. And it seemed like the
Yeah.
right thing to do. I was interested in it. It seemed like I either could get a job doing research in a company or going to medical school. Those were basically my options. I tell you, when I talk to students today, I hear the same thing. Hasn't changed in 35 years. I haven't heard, I haven't really heard, I wouldn't say it hasn't changed at all. There are groups out there. I think PharmD programs have evolved. There are, organizations that do focus on pharmaceutical development and have programs there, but they're few and far between. And they're not readily known and they're not widely known. It's not ever on that list of, what career do you want to have? Right. And so when I talk to students, and we at Regeneron particularly spend a lot of time, we have, science fairs, we have, the large, science program from Regeneron in general with high school students. There's just a host of things where we spend a lot of time trying to influence the next generation of leaders, especially as it pertains to science. And so that's perfect for my thinking, because I've always said, how do we get more people involved that know that this doesn't have, medicine, being a doctor, being a nurse, research are certainly options if you are interested in STEM these days. But there are other ways to go about it too. There are so many opportunities. And so I think we need to do a number of things. We need to really look at, how do we have a bigger influence in the college environment today. I encourage my team to get out there and go to the college fairs that Regeneron has, not just the research folks from our organization, but the development folks, right? That people who are not physicians, but who are really interested in science and want to progress it, and also have, backgrounds in pharmaceutical development. So that's one, but the other, relates to the technology piece. I do think, and look, I'd say I'm old school, right? I remember the day when we passed paper around. My first job where there was no email. So we had to.
Me too. Fax machines. Yeah.
Yeah.
The young people are probably listening to this and rolling their eyes.
Fax didn't come till later. My kids would laugh, but fax didn't come till later. And I remember, actually, I know the timing. It was in the early 2000s, because I remember at BMS, they brought us in at Icon and said, how can you get our teams to use DataFax to get our data in? How do you get the sites to use DataFax? And I was like, well, you just tell them to use DataFax. Like that, this is not practical. And that's what we did. We just told them you have to use it. But the idea then was, it's so hard to adopt this new technology. But we've been doing that, but we've been doing it slowly, right? DataFax is the new, yes, people started to use email. DataFax was how you got data in, and then it moved to electronic data capture. I think the world is changing so fast today. It's no longer a system like a EDC that comes into play. It's every system and everything we use, and all the, technology that we've put in place over the years, and the various systems we have. Now that's all coming together and automating, and there's, AI to fold on top of some of that. I don't think it takes the human out of the loop at all, right? I think the human has to be in the loop. But, and I feel pretty strongly about that. But I do think a lot of what we spend our time on will look different. And so I'm spending time educating, the people that are in my organization who haven't grown up with tech, or have, and just have evolved with it, to really think differently. When I was asked, 5 years ago, what's our workforce plan for the next few years? Even then I said, I think we need more data sciences folks. We need people who really have a better understanding of data. we already were amassing large amounts of data, using data differently. And I would say now I have the same ask. I need people who really understand data science. I need, AI engineers. I need people who can train folks. So I still need all the same people who have a lot of the same experience they're already bringing to the table. But I need some of them to have, additional training and skills that can, help us to automate and transform the way that we do things. So I do think there's a lot of, need to evolve pretty quickly because, the world's evolving around us. And, in the past, we've evolved very slowly as an industry, right? I mean, pharma has taken years to adopt things. And I think we have a little bit of a pass. We're highly regulated. We're very risk averse. We're not talking about building widgets or, building a technology. We're talking about people's lives,
Yes.
treating them. That just brings a different component. And it's why I think, have struggled to evolve, quickly. But I think we're really at that point. And I think COVID was one of the things, or, the kind of the change agents that got us to start thinking, how do we do things differently? But now technology is really going to push us, whether we want to be pushed or not.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, I love that you are going to colleges and you're doing science fairs because I know that I have adult children in the workforce now, and I know that there is with some companies and some people, the thinking that, well, you have to have 3-5 years experience under your belt if you want to be considered to, work for this company. And actually, recruiting and growing and mentoring people, I think is great, and giving young people a chance to flourish in this industry is really important. Um, I was kind of thinking about what you said about how it's taken a very long time to adopt new ways of working, and I think that we both have seen it because we've been in the industry for decades. Um, I don't think that can continue because there's just so much opportunity with the new technologies that are available to us. And we actually do need to figure out how to expedite clinical trial execution for the sake of patients. So we're sort of at a critical moment. Um, I wonder if you're optimistic about the future, because I'm sort of in this mode of waiting to see how things will evolve given the incredible complexity that we're all working under. Also, just the world has changed so much in terms of the amount of data and information and what we have to deal with just in the day-to-day work world. Everything has accelerated in terms of communication. And now, as an industry, we're being asked to embrace new ways of working with AI, and it's exciting. And I'm wondering, I just want to take the temperature of where you're at, and if you think this is the moment, we're at a turning point, and I'm optimistic, or are you kind of wondering if the past is going to actually inform how we perform in the future in terms of just being very slow to adopt new tech?
I am incredibly optimistic about this. I think it's an opportunity that we have not had to date. Right? There's been small pockets of change. There have been technologies that incrementally shift maybe something that we do that allow us to see different data. And I've recognized that over time. And I remember when we, first had a Spotfire tool that, we were looking at trends by comparing different notebooks in front of us. Now we had a machine that could actually pull some of those trends out. I think today is very different than those, incremental opportunities. I think that we have a tremendous opportunity to really shift thinking and to utilize both the data that's out there, which is, at our fingertips that we've not had before, at least not had access to, or maybe we've had access to some of it, but we haven't figured out how to use it. Right. So taking all that together and actually aligning to what the possibility is. I've spent a lot of the past, I'd say 6 months, showing my team the art of the possible, like looking at different companies who are out there and saying,
Mm-hmm.
okay, what kind of cool tool do you have, whether it's in our industry or another? Because some of it, we may not be at the forefront in everything. So trying to get people who are in other industries to share with us, how have you transformed a process or utilized a system differently? What are the skill sets? And I'll tell you, every time we sit and look at, wow, that's what you did before, and this is what you're doing now, and this is the information you have that you didn't have. The thinking, is just unbelievable. And people start to walk away from that, start to think about how do they change what they do, not just for the processes we have as a company, but even individually. I'll tell you, I sit on my phone every night. My kids, decided that they were going to use, and I have older kids as well, but they're, using ChatGPT or Claude or you name any of the AI,
Mm-hmm.
apps that are out there. I've done a ton of work in my personal life where I developed a plan, or I combined calendars. I did a whole host of things that would take me hours or I just couldn't even do in minutes.
Yeah.
My daughter and I are doing her schoolwork, and I have one who's still in high school, and we're doing schoolwork and thinking about how do we get these ideas together, and then go take that idea and go run with it. So I think in our personal lives, it'll change what we're doing, and we have to influence in both ways,
Yeah.
because if you don't start to use it yourself, you don't think about it as much in the day-to-day that you do in the workplace. But I would say even in the workplace, we are trying to imagine what this could look like. And I've said we have to, go into this unafraid, right? We have to embrace this. And I do think, interestingly, I think regulators are embracing it. I think, companies across the globe are embracing the opportunity. We just have to really be very thoughtful about how we do it. And so I have a lot of optimism about the change, but it will undoubtedly change what the industry looks like, and I think much more quickly than what we've seen in the past. It won't be a decade before we see some fundamental changes. It'll be, 2, 3 years.
Yeah. Well, I love that answer. I love your optimism and enthusiasm. I do think that when you have leaders who are in a position to think about the art of the possible and to actually broaden sort of people's thinking around like the why behind, shifting into a new operating model. Um, that's what's going to take, that's what's going to shift our industry. I was at a meeting where, DFarm, where it was sort of like this wait and see. Well, we're going to see what, if other companies adopt, these new tech tools and innovation. And if they do and they have success, then we'll adopt it. And if we're an industry of lemmings, then how do we move forward? So it makes me very hopeful talking to you, Bari, that you have this perspective.
Yeah, I don't want to be on the
I
wait
knew,
and see side. I want to be on the try side, right? Let's
yeah,
try it.
it's
Let's see if it
great.
works. I feel like, there are some times when being a fast follower is not a bad thing, but and unfortunately, I've made some decisions where I thought after, maybe I should have let someone else try that out first. But even still,
Yeah.
even with those times where I've, decided to try something or pilot it and it didn't work, that's okay. I knew going in,
Oh my
I knew
gosh.
what the
Yeah.
consequences were. I knew that it was a risk. I knew it might not work. And everyone's like, oh gosh, this failed. And I thought, maybe it did, but what did we learn? Right? What did we take away? And what would we not do again? Or what will we do differently? And so I think every experience is a learning experience. And there's no reason, unless, there are some fundamental things and corners we won't cut, and we will make sure the quality is there, and the
Yeah.
patient safety, the things that matter most are not going to be challenged. It's the everything else that we do that I think we have to challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, I love that. And as someone who's been advocating for new ways of working and sort of thinking differently about how we execute on trials. It's very inspiring, Barry. And I knew this would happen. I knew we'd start talking, and before you know it, we'd be out of time. But before we close this conversation, I kind of wanted to just kind of go to the personal a little bit, since we didn't really talk about sort of, you and kind of, personally what drives you. And I guess my last question is just like, Barry, what do you do for fun? I know you work very hard and you're very, very busy, but like, how do you blow off steam?
Yeah. Oh, well, I have 3 kids. So that, and people have always said, wow, I would never have known that you have 3 kids and you're always running around. And my kids were all in sports, and 2 of them are in college, one's in high school. And so at the end of the day, when I'm not focused on work, I am focused on my kids and the things that they're doing and their projects and their, college work, and their, my daughter actually started her first job. So I'm very involved with
That's great.
everything they do. And it was challenging throughout my career, having 3 kids and bringing them up and spending the right amount of time with them and being at the soccer games and, being on the sidelines for things and helping them with homework. So, if nothing else, I would say for me, that was always fun. That was always the thing that I got enjoyment out of. And I literally spent almost every weekend on a soccer field. So when I come into work and I was tan, they're like, Barry, where did you go?
What beach were you sitting on? Right?
Anyway, I was sitting on the side of a soccer field for hours, in some state, in the Northeast. But I think outside of that, I do think it's important to have work-life balance, and that's balanced me, right? Having kids and at different ages and dealing with all of that while, taking on new challenges at work has always been part of, I think, what makes me better at what I do, because I have to be super organized. I've tried everything. I've had calendars and boards and, all different things to try and keep things organized, and that's made me better at being organized at work. So that's always been a challenge, though, is to try to do everything. But I think it's possible. You just, you have to know where you have trade-offs. And, I've always tried to put my kids first at the end of the day, and enjoy, vacations and reading and skiing and running and, things like that. I wouldn't say, my kids have told me I need more hobbies, to be honest. So at some point when I retire, and I don't know when that is, I'll have to find those things that I thought I was exceptionally good at or that I just like, and do more of them. But, I think the reward of making a difference, both in people's lives. And, I will say my first, 12 years, maybe 15 in this industry, I didn't work on one approved thing, right? I just wasn't in the position. I didn't have a team that worked on something that ultimately got approved. And since then, and especially at Regeneron, I've been involved with so many different life-changing medicines that is incredibly rewarding. But the reality is, even though I might not have had a hands-on direct involvement in something, I'm part of an industry or a company that really does change people's lives. And so going to work every day, and getting that reward, I think is really meaningful. I also, there's the flip side of it too. We talked about colleges and students. I also have taken it, very seriously, that I've been a champion for others, not just students, but people in my organizations, helping them build careers, figuring out how to, build the next generation of leaders to do the things that I'm doing, that do the work that we all do. So that to me has been rewarding as well. How can I make not only a difference in the lives of people who we're treating, but the lives of the people who do this really hard work that we do? And so that's been very meaningful to me too. So I don't claim to be a, great cook or baker or any of these things. I enjoy the things that a lot of other people do, but mostly I spend time with my kids, my family, and then really try to have a bit of work-life balance.
Yeah. Well, Barry, you've been a great role model, not only for your kids, but for so many in the industry. And I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation. I've admired you over many years, so I really appreciate you talking with me today.
Well, thank you. The feeling is mutual. And, I think our relationship goes way back, right? This is 25 years or so almost.
Yeah.
And I appreciate what you've brought to the industry as well. Really, that the thoughtfulness around how we partner on quality, all the things that you've pushed for have made a tremendous difference in the industry as a whole. So I not only appreciate being honored like this as part of your podcast, but also being a part of the work you've done as well.
That's so kind. Thank you so much.
Thank
and
you.
We'll talk soon.
Okay.